The wind howls through the ruins of Stalingrad like a death cry echoing across Europe. What was once a vibrant city is now just a graveyard of stone, steel, and human flesh. Ice covers everything, the wreckage, the tanks, the bodies, and beneath that murderous cold lies the pride of Nazi Germany, the Sixth Army of Friedrich Paulus. For months, those men fought on the banks of the Volga River, believing they would achieve a victory that would change the course of the war. But now, in January 1943, there is no more honor, no glory, only hunger, disease, and despair. Inside the frozen ruins, German soldiers shiver, wrapped in scraps of blankets, burning what little wood remains to try and survive another night. Many no longer have the strength even to speak. Some look to the horizon and see only snow, endless, silent, indifferent. The sound of Soviet boots approaches in the wind. The encirclement is complete. Paulus, surrounded and out of ammunition, surrenders. Germany watches in Nashoktas. 300,000 soldiers disappear in the ice. The mighty army that crossed all of Europe is now transformed into ghosts, prisoners of the cold. Further south, chaos reigns supreme. German and Romanian divisions retreat in panic, pursued by Soviet forces. Entire columns march along snow-covered roads, dragging wounded soldiers, dead horses and trucks stuck in the ice. Abandoned tanks lie like metal carcasses, burned to the chassis, a reminder of the price of arrogance. The Russian winter is unforgiving. The temperature drops to 30 degrees, and even the engine oil freezes. Soldiers sleep in the open and don't wake up. Hunger forces many to eat frozen horse meat when they are lucky enough to find a dead animal. Every step is torment, and the ground covered in frozen blood glistens under the grey light of a weak sun. Amidst the despair and chaos, a calm, cold and calculating figure emerges. Erich von Manstein, the general whom Hitler calls his most brilliant strategist, arrives on the Eastern Front and finds not an army, but a multitude of exhausted, broken, faithless men. The German lines are broken, communications destroyed, and the Soviets advance like an unstoppable red tide. Manstein stares at the map. His gaze is hard, almost icy like the surrounding climate. He knows the enemy believes the Wehrmacht is finished, and perhaps, in part, that's true. But inside him, there's something that neither the cold nor defeat can freeze, the conviction that the war can still be turned around. As the winds howl and the flames of Stalingrad slowly die down, Manstein begins to plan the unthinkable. A redemption in the midst of frozen hell. Germany is on its knees, but the old warrior knows winter still holds room for one last blow. A counterattack that will wash away the blood of Stalingrad in the snows of Kharkov. If you felt the fire of history today, subscribe and march with us through the battles that shaped our world. The Russian winter swallows everything: men, machines, and hope. The roads have become trails of agony, marked by bloody footprints and tire tracks that always lead in the same direction, westward, away from hell. The German army, or what's left of it, is in total withdrawal. They are endless columns of ragged soldiers, walking with faces burned by the cold and vacant eyes, unsure if they are fleeing or merely postponing death. Every step is a struggle against nature itself. The snow rises to the knees, the wind cuts the skin like blades, and the ice hardens the fingers until many can no longer hold their weapons. The sound of engines is rare. Most tanks and trucks have been abandoned, without fuel, without oil, frozen like useless blocks of iron in the middle of the white vastness. Behind them, the Soviets are coming like a living storm. Artillery thunders, T-34 tanks advance, spitting fire, and Soviet fighter planes swoop down on the roads like vultures on carrion. German troops do not retreat. They flee. Fleeing is the only option. The wounded are left behind, covered in snow until they disappear. Hitler's orders, coming from Berlin, still demand not a step back, but in reality, there is no longer a front nor a rear, only chaos. Men shout for comrades lost in the fog. Others crawl in the snow, begging for help that will not come. When a horse falls dead from exhaustion, the soldiers crowd around it, not out of pity but for meat. They cut chunks with bayonets and eat them right there, while the warm blood still flows. Humanity dissolves under the cold. The sky is always grey, heavy. With each distant explosion, snowflakes mingle with soot. The destroyed villages are just charred shadows, and the peasants look on in silence, knowing that war has already passed through here and will return. Many soldiers, looking east, see plumes of smoke and think of Stalingrad. They know the Sixth Army was there, buried in the ice, and they wonder, will we be next? Amidst the chaos, the officers try to maintain discipline, but the radios fail, orders don't arrive, and each group fights on its own. Units mix, companies disappear, and the maps no longer make sense. The snow covers the dead, and when the wind blows stronger, the entire field seems to groan. A collective lament of an army dying frozen. And it is in this scenario of absolute despair that Erich von Manstein, he walks among his men. His coat is the same, his gaze too, cold, calculating, unwavering. He observes the disaster and sees not only defeat. He sees patterns, opportunities, gaps. While everyone else retreats, he thinks about counterattacking. In the midst of that silent slaughter, the seed of redemption emerges. Manstein knows the army needs to stop running away and do the impossible, to fight again, even if buried under snow and fear. The tragedy of the retreat is not yet over, but in the shadows of ice and death, the idea of a missing word begins to emerge. Masterstroke, the counterattack that will turn fugitives into predators. While the German armies crawl across the ice, Moscow celebrates radio broadcasts echoed throughout the Soviet Union. Stalingrad had been liberated. For the first time since the beginning of the war, the Red Army not only resisted, it won. In the Kremlin, Stalin's face remains impassive, but his eyes gleam with satisfaction. The victory over Paulus's Sixth Army is more than just military. It's psychological, symbolic, historical. The myth of German invincibility was shattered on the ice of the Volga. On the front lines, Soviet morale soars. Red flags flutter above still smoldering ruins, and soldiers march, believing that final victory is near. The generals Vatutin, Voronov, Rokossovsky, they gather before enormous maps, plotting new offensives with almost arrogant confidence. They look south and see a retreating enemy, disorganized, freezing to death. Kharkov, Belgorod, Kursk, everything seems within easy reach. Soviet intelligence reports that the Germans are broken. They have no reserves, they have no fuel, they have no morale. The words sound like music to the ears of the Red Command. The orders are direct. Forward, forward, without stopping. The plan is grandiose, to push the Germans back to the Dnieper River and, if possible, liberate all of Ukraine. For the Soviets, this is the moment to crush the enemy once and for all. The armored columns begin to advance across the White Plains. Thousands of T-34 tanks, trucks, artillery, cavalry, and infantry move like an unstoppable tide. The ground trembles under the weight of the steel tracks, and the sound of the engines mingles with the howling of the wind. The soldiers laugh, sing, and many sincerely believe that the war will end that winter. They march confidently, rifles slung over their necks and cigarettes in their lips, passing the wreckage of burned-out German tanks. For them, the Wehrmacht is finished, but success brings with it an invisible danger, overconfidence. The further they advance, the more the Soviet columns extend. Supply lines become long and vulnerable, and communications begin to fail. Some commanders warn of the risks, of the possibility of a trap, but are ignored. The Germans are fleeing, say the superiors. They no longer have the strength to fight back. As the Red Army advances and the generals celebrate, Manstein watches in silence. In his makeshift headquarters, he tracks the enemy's every move with surgical precision. He sees what the Soviets don't see: excessive progress, disorganization, arrogance. Manstein understands that the Soviet victory created an illusion, and that is precisely what he intends to use against them. On the other side of the front, Stalin's generals toast with vodka to the German defeat. Little do they know that winter, the same winter that gave them victory at Stalingrad, soon you will witness the approaching vengeance of steel. The snow still covers the ground, but beneath it, something begins to move. Kharkov's bloody redemption plan. The wind cut his face like razors. The vast white expanse seemed endless, and each gust carried with it the distant echo of explosions. In the midst of that icy hell, a command car advances slowly. Inside it, wrapped in a heavy grey overcoat, is Erich von Manstein, the man Hitler sent to save what remained of the German army in southern Russia. As he gets out of the vehicle, he faces the landscape of destruction before him. Exhausted German soldiers covered in mud and ice pass by in silence, some unarmed, others dragging their feet like specters. Burned trucks, frozen tanks, and snow-covered corpses compose an almost apocalyptic scene. There are no parades, no greetings, just the empty stares of men who have seen hell and come back. Manstein walks slowly among them, observing. He doesn't shout, he doesn't show emotion. He just thinks, analyzes, calculates. His gaze is that of a predator who, even when surrounded, still searches for the enemy's weak point. While many generals would have lost faith in the face of such a collapse, Manstein remains cool and rational, a strategist in his element. In his command tent, lit by flickering lamps, he spreads maps across the table. The red lines of the Soviet advance stretch everywhere. It seems impossible to stop them, but Manstein sees something that others don't: the Soviets. They move too fast. Its lines are long, fragile, and spaced far apart. It's a snake that stretched so far to attack that it exposed its own belly. An officer rushes in, covered in snow, and delivers reports. Soviet forces are in every direction, Marshal. They're coming through Belgorod, Kharkov, and even Poltava. There's no way to hold a position. Manstein looks at the map and replies in a calm voice. Then we won't hold our position. We'll let them come, and then we'll destroy them. These words resonate like a challenge to destiny itself. Hitler demands resistance at all costs, but Manstein knows that fighting where he is suicide. So he makes a bold decision: withdraw a little further, retreat to open ground, and lure the Soviets into a gigantic trap. It's a risky move, but it's the only one that can save the entire army group south. As he draws up the plan, the distant sound of Soviet engines grows louder, mingled with the roar of the wind. Outside, the German soldiers still believe all is lost, but the man inside that tent, silent, focused, cold as winter itself, is already beginning to change the course of the war. Manstein is neither a hero nor an idealist. He is a war surgeon, willing to cut through the rotting flesh of the front lines to save the whole body. And now, amidst the ice and death, he prepares his masterpiece of destruction, an operation that will turn fugitives into hunters and chaos into revenge. The fox of retreat had arrived, and from that moment on, the snow would start bleeding again. Don't let these stories fade into the snow of time. Subscribe now and keep history alive. In the heart of the Ukrainian winter, surrounded by white fields and biting winds, lay Kharkov, a city that had already felt the weight of war before, but would now become the center of destiny for thousands of men. It was more than just a point on the map. Kharkov was the key to southern Russia. Kharkiv was the vital hub of roads and railways linking the entire Eastern Front. Whoever controlled Kharkiv controlled Ukraine, and perhaps the course of the war. The city, with its destroyed factories and streets covered in dirty snow, still bore the scars of previous battles. The air smelled of smoke and burnt iron. The windows were broken, and the buildings, riddled with bullets, seemed to silently watch the approaching army. But now the enemy came from the north, the Red Army, marching confidently after the victory at Stalingrad. For the Soviets, Kharkov was the next trophy. T-34 tanks, gleaming under the pale February sun, advanced on the horizon. The metallic sound of their tracks echoed across the plains, mingled with the shouts of hurrah from soldiers who believed they were pursuing a defeated enemy. They saw the city as easy prey, another step in the liberation of Ukraine. On the German side, the situation was desperate. The infantry divisions were reduced to skeletons, starving men, poorly armed, without supplies. The cold bit into their bones, and every bullet counted. Morale was as low as the temperature, but amidst the fear and exhaustion, an order begins to circulate. Defend Kharkov at all costs. Inside the city, the streets become trenches. The 4th Panzer Army and the Waffen-SS divisions, led by Hauser, fight house to house, building to building. The Soviets attack with everything they have: heavy artillery, mortars, infantry in relentless waves. The ground trembles, the roofs collapse, and the snow mixes with blood. The fighting lasts for days, without respite. Every corner is conquered and lost several times. Civilians caught in the crossfire hide in dark basements, listening to the sound of cannons and boots rushing overhead. Many have nowhere else to go. The city, once a vibrant industrial center, is now just a shadow, a fortress surrounded by fire and ruins. And while the Soviets are pressing, Manstein observes from a distance. He knows that Kharkov cannot be defended for much longer, but unlike Hitler, he doesn't think about dying for every square meter of land. He thinks about how to use loss to prepare the coup. Let the city bleed, but remain calm. He knows that the Soviet victory in Kharkov will only be apparent, a step forward that will lead them straight to the abyss. The city that everyone wants to dominate becomes a deadly trap. And in the silence between the bombings, the wind carries with it the omen of what is to come. Kharkov will fall, but from the ruins, vengeance will rise. Snow still covers the destroyed streets. Tanks burn in the avenues, and the cries of the wounded echo through the frozen alleys. But in the shadows, Manstein smiles for the first time. The enemy believes he has won, and that's exactly what he wanted. February 1943. Imagine yourself there, in the icy heart of the Ukrainian inferno, where the wind is not merely a breath of nature, but a living blade that cuts through flesh to the bone, carrying with it the acrid stench of death and desolation. Kharkov, once a gleaming jewel of Soviet industry, its factories spewing steel and smoke into the grey skies of Eastern Europe, is now nothing more than a charred skeleton, a labyrinth of ruins, where every shadow hides a sniper and every corner is an open grave. The entire city trembles under the incessant bombardment. Soviet cannons roar like the thunder of an angry god, spitting projectiles that tear through the air with a sharp whistle, before exploding in orange flames, turning entire buildings into piles of flaming rubble. The ground vibrates, the air fills with suffocating dust, mixed with snowflakes blackened by soot. And the sound, the sound is the worst of all. German MG-42 machine guns, spitting death at a demonic speed, a mechanical roar that seems to laugh at humanity, echoing through the destroyed avenues like the lament of 1,000 lost souls. The Soviets burst forth like a horde from the depths of the Siberian winter, a red tide of rage, pent up after years of humiliation. General Rybalko's 3rd Tank Army, commanded by the impetuous Popov, advanced with a ferocity that would make even the devil recoil. T-34 tanks, those steel monsters with tilted turrets and 76mm guns, spewing fire, roared through the frozen streets, their tracks crushing makeshift barricades of furniture, abandoned vehicles, and, God forgive us, human bodies frozen in grotesque postures of agony, fallen soldiers with glazed eyes staring at the empty sky, civilians with contorted faces screaming silently. The Soviet armored vehicles did not stop. They trampled everything, crushing bones as if they were dry branches, leaving trails of frozen blood that gleamed like rubies in the dim winter sun. On the German side, what remains is a handful of ghosts in tattered uniforms, men who once marched proudly under the swastika, now reduced to starving spectres, their faces hollowed by cold and hunger, their eyes bloodshot with a despair bordering on madness. They resist with what's left, grenades that explode in bursts of lethal shrapnel, Kar 98K rifles that fire with deadly precision from shattered windows, and the dreaded MG-42s, nicknamed Hitler's Saw for their infernal rate of fire. But they are few, oh so few. The elite divisions of the Waffen-SS, the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, with its fanatical soldiers tattooed with the blood of perverse ideals, the Das Reich, whose men carry in their souls the weight of past atrocities in burned villages, and the Totenkopf, the skulls who fight as if death were a welcome mistress, entrench themselves in every burned building, every ruined factory, every basement flooded with icy water. House by house, floor by floor, room by room, it's a macabre dance of advance and retreat. An SS platoon climbs creaking staircases, grenades rolling through dark corridors, explosions illuminating pale, sweaty faces despite the cold. They fire through broken windows, mowing down waves of Soviet infantry emerging from the fog like red demons, bayonets fixed and blood-curdling cries of "Hurrah!" But the Soviets return, always returning, again and again, floods of men in padded coats, fur, hats covered in frost. Every street is conquered with rivers of blood, lost in furious counterattacks, reconquered again in an endless cycle of carnage. The avenues are covered with a horrific carpet, twisted metal shards, crushed helmets, severed limbs frozen in impossible poses, faces of young soldiers, blonde Germans with now opaque blue eyes, Slavic Russians with ice-encrusted beards, mixed together in a macabre brotherhood of death. And the civilians, poor souls trapped in the middle of this vortex of madness. Entire families drag themselves through the rubble, mothers carrying whimpering children in their arms, old men staggering with empty eyes, like those who have already seen the end of the world. They run between tracer bullets that streak across the night like malevolent shooting stars, seeking refuge in damp basements where the air is thin and the cries of babies echo like a requiem. Many don't make it. A grenade explodes in a panicked crowd, bodies fly through the air like broken dolls. A Soviet tank crushes a line of refugees as if they were insects. SS snipers, hidden in burned towers, shoot down any suspicious movement, for in total war there are no innocents. Orphaned children wander the streets, frozen hands outstretched in silent supplication, large eyes filled with a terror that no adult should impose on such a young soul. Old men collapse in the snow, hearts stopping not from the cold, but from the absolute horror of seeing their city, their lives, dissolve into dust and fire. Kharkov groans like a wounded beast. Its iconic buildings, Dzerzhinsky Square, the university, the tractor factories that once fueled the Stalinist dream, now mass graves where the smell of burnt gunpowder mingles with that of charred flesh, a perfume of apocalypse that permeates the nostrils forever. In the makeshift German headquarters in cold, damp bunkers, officers in filthy uniforms send desperate messages via crackling radio, ammunition depleted, tanks destroyed. By Soviet park fronts, enemy on all flanks. Trembling voices, hands shaking over torn maps. But from Berlin, from the distant bunker, where a madman dictates the fate of millions, comes Hitler's unwavering order. Kharkov will be defended to the last man, to the last bullet. No retreat. For the Führer, sitting on maps that feel no cold, the city is a symbol, a trophy that cannot be lost. For the men on the front, it is a sentence of slow annihilation, a slow-motion crucifixion under the merciless winter sky. But up west, in a command post hidden in the shadows of a snowy forest, Erich von Manstein, the master of maneuver, the tactical genius with eyes as cold as the steel of his tanks, observes the chaos with terrifying calm. He sees beyond the immediate. Every lost meter is bait, every retreating division a piece in the deadly chess game he plays against fate. Against Hitler's insane orders, he authorizes strategic retreats, evacuations disguised as orderly withdrawals. It's a brilliant act of betrayal, a cold calculation where lives are mere numbers in a larger plan. His subordinates, from SS Hauser onward, obey reluctantly, knowing that disobeying the Führer could cost them their heads, but trusting the man who has saved armies before. On the fateful night of February 15th, under a blanket of darkness pierced by illuminating rockets that bathed the ruins in spectral light, the last German defenders abandoned the city. Columns of SS tanks, panthers with long, spear-like cannons, imposing tigers screeching over the snow, retreated along muddy roads, carrying wounded men groaning in agony, bodies wrapped in blood-soaked blankets. Controlled explosions destroyed bridges behind them, echoing like final farewells. Behind them, the Soviets entered triumphantly, exhausted but euphoric soldiers, raising red flags over piles of rubble, shouting premature victories as they trod through pools of frozen blood. For the Red Army, Kharkov is liberated, a milestone in the inexorable march towards Berlin. For the world, watching from afar, it seems like the twilight of the Reich, the beginning of the Nazi collapse after Stalingrad. But Manstein, with his icy smile, knows the hidden truth. The Soviets have taken the bait. Their voracious advance has stretched them like a rope about to snap, flanks exposed like veins opened in the cold. They celebrate in the ruins, drink vodka stolen from destroyed cellars, sing victory hymns, without realizing that the surrounding snow hides hungry eyes, that the German silence is not defeat, but the whisper of approaching death. The city fell, yes, swallowed by the abyss, but in the icy shadows, something primal awakens, a vengeance forged in steel and hatred, ready to devour the devourers. Kharkov is not the end. It is the prelude to a greater horror where Soviet despair will soon echo louder than the German ever dared. The Red Army, drunk with glory after the bloodbath at Stalingrad and the bloody conquest of Kharkov, advances like a blind giant, driven by Stalin's blind fury and the illusion that the Nazi wolf is dying. February 1943, and the Kremlin echoes with imperious orders. Advance to the Dnieper, to the borders of the Reich. Give no quarter to the dying fascist. Newspapers like Pravda scream fiery headlines. The Wehrmacht is shattered. Winter is our eternal ally, while workers in distant factories hammer with renewed vigor, dreaming of a peace that seems so close. But on the front, where the wind cuts like knives and the snow swallows whole boots, reality is a slow poison, exhausted troops, supplies that drag like ghosts, and an advance that transforms victory into vulnerability. General Nikolai Vatutin, the ambitious commander of the Voronezh front, his eyes blazing with thirst for promotion and eternal glory, orders the unthinkable, an advance without pause, without consolidation, without pity for human fatigue. His columns stretch like endless serpents across the frozen vastness of Ukraine. Hundreds of kilometers of T-34 tanks roaring ahead, tracks churning mud and snow in a red paste of blood and spilled fuel. Behind, infantry marches in disordered ranks, soldiers with frost-covered faces, eyes sunken like wells of despair, soaked boots that freeze their feet to gangrene. They traverse ghost villages, burned-out houses where peasant bodies hang from beams like rotten fruit, half-frozen rivers cracking under the weight of bogged-down trucks, fields where hungry wolves follow the columns, drawn by the smell of fresh meat. The men believe the propaganda. The German flees like rats. Berlin awaits us. They laugh around makeshift campfires, share meager rations of stale bread and watered-down vodka, tell tales of heroism while the cold seeps to the core. Tanks lead the way, cannons pointed at the empty horizon, red flags fluttering like challenges to the grey sky. Kharitonov's 6th Army, Katukov's Tank Corps, legendary units hardened by years of suffering, push forward, isolated by vast expanses of snowy steppe, their flanks exposed like open wounds inviting infection. On the other side, Erich von Manstein, the architect of destiny, observes from his headquarters with the precision of a surgeon dissecting a living victim. He understands the Soviet era better than the Russian generals themselves. Advancing too quickly is poison. Supply lines stretched like wires about to snap, units separated by dozens of kilometers of icy emptiness, unprotected flanks where the wind howls freely. Luftwaffe FW-190 planes, rare but lethal, buzz over enemy columns, strafing convoys, taking photos that reveal the chaos. Fuel-less tanks standing still like carcasses, infantry scattered like panicked ants. Reports arrive in piles. Popov isolated to the south, Rybalka without air cover, fuel depleted in the third tank. Manstein, with his icy calm, smiles. A smile without warmth, that of a predator who smells blood. His own men are on the edge, frozen to the bone, fingers blackened with frostbite, ammunition counted bullet by bullet. But he has the trump card. The SS divisions, fresh from replacements with new tanks, imposing Tigers with 80 mm guns that pierce any armor, Panthers as agile as panthers on the prowl. Against Hitler, who shouts, "No retreat," Manstein secretly reorganizes, pulls invisible strings, and prepares the trap. On Soviet roads, terror begins to creep in. Supplies are delayed, trucks get bogged down in blinding. Blizzards, drivers freeze at the wheel with eyes wide open in silent accusation. Communications fail, radios crackle with static, messages are lost in the cold ether. Soldiers whisper, "Why did the Germans stop? Where are they?" The enemy silence is worse than the bombardment, an oppressive void, like the calm before the storm that devours nations. A young lieutenant, in a blood-stained diary, scribbles with trembling hands. The front opened like a mouth. We advanced into it. The wind carries. The smell of death, hot metal, rotting flesh. Something watches us from the hills. God, if he exists, has abandoned us. And he senses the truth. Behind the dark forests, in the snow-covered ravines, German forces gather like living shadows. Engines hum softly, hastily repaired by mechanics with bleeding fingers. Tanks line up in lethal formations, crews with fanatical eyes drinking stolen hot coffee. Coded messages fly. Operation ready. Close the pincer. Manstein's plan is a masterpiece of cruelty. Let the Soviet bear advance to exhaustion, then strike the flanks, surround and crush. Stalin in Moscow demands more. Advance or face the platoon. Blinded by paranoia and the prospect of easy victory, his generals obey, pushing men to the slaughter. But on the Donetsk plains, winter becomes treacherous, snow that hides mines, ice that betrays bridges, cold that kills more than bullets. The mistake is sealed in blood. The intoxication of victory blinded the Soviets to the abyss. Now, the counterattack awakens, a thunder of steel that will echo like the final judgment. What was a triumphant advance will become a desperate flight, sieges where thousands will cry out for non-existent mercy. The hell of the Volga pales before what is to come. The Donets will become a river of red tears, and Soviet despair, once German, will swallow entire legions in the icy claws of Manstein. Vengeance marches, inexorable, and winter laughs at all the fools who dared to defy it. Imagine yourself there, in the frigid belly of the Ukrainian steppe, where the dawn of February 19th, 1943, doesn't break as light, but as a veil of murderous blizzard, a white mantle that swallows the world in a primal howl of cutting wind, laden with ice crystals that lash the skin like poisoned needles. The Donets, that treacherous river that meanders through the endless plains, freezes silently under the storm, hiding beneath its fragile crust the secrets of an ancient trap. For weeks, Erich von Manstein, the tactical demon with a soul of steel tempered in the forges of Verdun and Stalingrad, orchestrated the perfect charade, calculated retreats, divisions bleeding drop by drop, feigning the death throes of an army on the verge of collapse. He fed Soviet pride like one fattens a pig for slaughter, letting Stalin and his marshals, Vatutin, Golikov, the ambitious map-devouring types, believe that the Reich was on its knees, that the Russian winter, that merciless ally, had finally broken. The Wehrmacht's back, but in the heart of the blizzard, the beast awakens. Engines roar, muffled by the storm's fury. Thousands of tanks and half-tracks move like living shadows, and the air vibrates with the premonition of a vengeance that will make the devil himself tremble. The blow descends like Thor's hammer upon the anvil of destiny. In the early grey hours, the deafening roar erupts, not of celestial thunder, but of Maybach engines spitting fire and fury, echoing across the snowy expanses. Like the bellow of ancient dragons awakened from their eternal slumber, the elite divisions of the Waffen-SS, those fanatics forged in Himmler's dark creed, emerge from the whiteness like armored spectres. The Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, commanded by the ruthless Sepp Dietrich, whose men carry in their veins the poison of absolute fanaticism. The Das Reich, veterans of massacres in burned villages, with eyes that have seen the abyss and laughed at it. And the Totenkopf, the skull-bearers, soldiers who treat death as an old companion, tattooed with symbols of bones and runes that promise annihilation. Ahead, the invincible monsters, the Tiger C, 57-ton colossi with 88mm Qk-36 cannons that spew projectiles at infernal speeds, piercing the sloped armor of Soviet T-34s as if they were scrap metal, turning enemy tanks into volcanic eruptions of orange flames and crews screaming in agony as the fuel consumes them alive. The Panzer Grenadiers follow in the wake of the giants, motorized. Infantry and half-tracks as KKF 251, faces covered in frost and gas masks rendered useless, shouting hymns of hatred as they fire MP40s that spit death in short, lethal bursts. Behind them, the agile and deadly Panzer K4 AUSF, G flank like wolves in a pack. The attack is a symphony of orchestrated chaos, field artillery, 150mm howitzers, and Nebelwerfer Raketenwerfer, the organs of Stalin stolen and turned against their creators, tear across the horizon with demonic howls, projectiles falling. Like meteor showers on Soviet columns that marched confidently, now reduced to piles of twisted metal and torn flesh. The Soviets, poor souls deluded by Kremlin propaganda, which painted the German as a cornered rat. They awaken to the nightmare the instant the first Tiger emerges from the blizzard, its long cannon, like a spear of the apocalypse, spitting death 2 kilometers away. The third tank army, the pride of Rybalko and Popov, disintegrates in primal panic. T-34 tanks, once masters of the steppes, spin their turrets in despair, firing blindly into the whiteness, but the projectiles bounce harmlessly off the Tiger's frontal armor, while the Germans respond with surgical precision. One shot, a Soviet tank exploding in a fireball that illuminates the blizzard like an evil sun born from hell. Entire columns try to maneuver, but the soft, treacherous snow swallows tracks, burying steel monsters in white graves. ZS-5 trucks skid on the ice. Artillery horses neigh in terror before, being machine-gunned, men leap from burning vehicles, rolling in the snow to extinguish the flames that devour their clothes and skin. The Luftwaffe, reborn from the ashes like a phoenix with black wings, dominates the skies that once belonged to the Soviet Sturmovix. Squadrons of Ju-87 Stukas dive with blaring sirens, the trumpet of Jericho announcing the end. 500 kiloliters bombs falling on makeshift bridges, ammunition depots exploding in mushroom clouds that melt the surrounding snow, revealing the bare earth stained with blood. FW-190s hunt down any Yak fighters that dare to take off, shooting them down in aerial duels that paint the sky with trails of smoke and parachutes that never open. On the ground, chaos is absolute. Soviet radios crackle with hysterical voices. Enemy on the flanks, heavy tanks, retreat to the Donets. But orders from Moscow are senseless. Don't retreat, shoot to the last man. Stalin, the paranoid man with the steel mustache, sees betrayal in every defeat and sends NKVD commissars to execute officers who dare to suggest retreat. At the epicenter of the storm, Popov's mobile group, that audacious vanguard that had advanced too far in the intoxication of victory, is the first to feel the claws of the pincers. The Totenkopf, with its legendary cruelty, cuts supply lines like a scythe reaping ripe wheat. Surrounded in a vast cauldron of snow and fire, thousands of Soviets fight for days in a pocket of despair. Fuel-less tanks become static fortresses. Infantry digs trenches in the ice with bayonets. Grenades roll under German armor in futile sacrifices. Men freeze alive, black fingers falling like dry leaves, glazed eyes staring into nothingness as frostbite devours noses and ears. Wounded men crawl through the snow, leaving red trails that attract hungry crows, crying out for distant mothers in Moscow or Leningrad, for a mercy that winter denies. The Luftwaffe bombed relentlessly, turning the pocket into a bubbling cauldron of explosions, where dismembered bodies flew through the air, limbs mixed together in a macabre soup of shattered humanity. Manstein, from his command post, an improvised bunker on an abandoned farm, maps scattered beneath flickering lamps, the air smelling of cold coffee and tobacco, commands with the coldness of an indifferent god. His eyes, piercing as blades, follow the arrows on the map. Advance from the south, flank from the north, close the pincer now. It's the classic Kanai revisited, the double encirclement he perfected in past campaigns. Paul Hauser's 2 SS Panzer Corps, joining Hoth's 4th Panzer Army, the ex-IRT Panzer Corps with its newly arrived Panthers, converging like the jaws of a primordial beast. The circle closes with mathematical precision, crushing entire armies. The Soviet 6th Army, the 1st Guards Army, fragments of the Voronezh front, tens of thousands trapped in a vortex of steel and ice. Across the front, the horror multiplies. Soviet soldiers, their faces blackened by soot and despair, attempt to break through in suicidal charges, fixed bayonets against impenetrable tigers, grenades strapped to their bodies in kamikaze attacks that barely scratch German paint. The ice in the rivers cracks under the weight of fugitives, swallowing entire columns of black water that freezes around the drowned alive. Tanks burn like eternal torches, illuminating nights where wolves howl alongside maddened men. The smell, God, the smell is the worst. Burnt diesel mixed with charred flesh, excrement of fear and fresh blood, a perfume of apocalypse that clings to the nostrils and nightmares forever. The few who escape, staggering ghosts, tattered uniforms, eyes haunted by visions no human being should endure, whisper blood-curdling tales. They emerged from the blizzard like demons. The ground trembled with their steel monsters. The sky rained death. Surrounded, always surrounded, without food, without bullets, only the cold eating us alive. In mere weeks, what had been a triumphant Soviet advance from Stalingrad to Kharkov, dreaming of the Dnieper, collapsed into a biblical catastrophe. More than 50,000 dead or captured, hundreds of tanks destroyed, entire divisions annihilated. Manstein, insatiable, does not stop. His eyes turn to Kharkov, the martyr city lost in Hitler's madness. Now, with the enemy bleeding and broken, the SS divisions march toward bloody redemption. They will enter the smoking ruins house by house again, but this time as avenging conquerors. Winter laughs. The Donets freeze the cries of the defeated, and the counterattack, that stroke of genius forged in despair and brilliance, reverses the course of the war in the east. But at what cost? Plains covered with makeshift crosses, snow tinged with eternal red, lost souls howling in the wind. Hell was white, yes, and Manstein was its supreme architect. The blood trap closed, and Eastern Europe would never be the same again. Kharkov, the lost city, the cursed city. She lies. Ahead, shrouded in smoke, ruins and frozen corpses. The Soviets took it weeks ago, but now Manstein's forces are returning, hungry for revenge. The third battle for Kharkov will begin. and it will be one of the bloodiest urban battles of the entire war. On the morning of March 11th, 1943, the division's Leibstandarte, the Empyrean Skull, they surrounded the city on three sides. The cold is biting. The streets are covered in snow mixed with blood and debris. The Soviets still believe they can resist, but they don't know that the encirclement is already complete. From atop a destroyed building, the General Reyes, commander of the SS divisions, observes the horizon. Beside him, the gunner adjusts his binoculars and murmurs, "Sir, they are digging in the ruins." Hauser simply replies, "Then let's bury them together." The attack begins with a deafening roar. Utigeroi. They advance along the wide avenues, making their way through debris and crumbling walls. Behind them, the SS soldiers move like shadows, machine guns in hand, grenades in their pockets, cold eyes fixed on the enemy. Each city block becomes a fortress, each building a vertical trench. The Soviets fought desperately, firing from windows, basements, and holes in the walls. The Germans responded with flamethrowers, grenades, and direct cannon fire. The sounds are hellish: screams, explosions, the metallic echo of tanks ricocheting off the narrow streets. A soldier from Leibstandarte later describes, "We fought from house to house. Sometimes the enemy was in the next room. We threw grenades and waited to hear silence. The smell of death was everywhere." The Luftwaffe bombs mercilessly, turning entire blocks into dust. But Manstein orders, "Don't destroy Kharkov completely. It will be ours again." And so the air strikes become surgically precise, just enough to break through the toughest Soviet defenses. Every hour the Germans advance a few meters. The Soviets retreat, but not without a fight. They leave. Traps, mines, and snipers on every corner. The casualties are heavy. The bodies of soldiers from both sides freeze together on the ground, side by side, eternal enemies in death. Amid the devastation, the sun tries to break through the clouds, illuminating the chaos. Smoke rises from chimneys and craters. The sound of machine guns echoes between the buildings. The ground is covered in shards and flakes of ice, stained red. On the day march, 14 German tanks finally break through to the city center. The SS banner is hoisted over the ruins of the municipal government building. Kharkov is German again, but there is no celebration. The price was monstrous. Thousands of bodies lie beneath the melting snow. The Soviet survivors retreated north, leaving only destruction in their wake. Manstein, in his headquarters, observes the map. Kharkiv has been reconquered, but the gleam in his eyes is not one of triumph. It's of weariness and silent despair. He knows that this victory is just a breather before the next hell. And around the city, the wind blows, cold and cutting, over the smoldering wreckage and the blood-stained streets. Kharkov was redeemed, but at the cost of carnage. The map on the control panel is covered in red scratched markings and blue arrows pointing forward. Kharkov is once again under German control. The reports arrive one after another. Soviet forces retreated to Belgorod. The Red Army suffered colossal losses. The southern front is stabilized. Manstein, standing in the front of the map, simply nods his head. He doesn't smile. He knows what it cost. Every inch regained was paid for with blood and snow, with the bodies of thousands of young people frozen in the ruins. But in the eyes of history, this is one of the greatest tactical maneuvers of World War II. The recapture of Kharkov, a stroke of genius amidst misfortune. Within weeks, the Marshal had transformed the collapse of the southern front into a stunning victory. The impossible had been accomplished once. Again, in the fields surrounding the city, the air smells of gunpowder and destruction. SS and 4th Panzer Army soldiers walk among the wreckage, collecting the wounded, cleaning weapons, smoking in silence. There is no celebration. Victory tastes of iron and ashes. Meanwhile, in Berlin, Hitler received the news with a mixture of pride and irritation. On the one hand, the miracle of Kharkov is exactly the kind of feat he used to inflate the nation's morale. The Reich's newspapers immediately burst into headlines. Kharkov reconquered. Manstein's genius saves the Eastern Front. But Hitler knows that Manstein disobeyed direct orders. He had ordered it. Do not back down. And Manstein retreated, deliberately, coldly, to lure the enemy and counterattack. The Führer, vain and paranoid, hates this. Kharkov's triumph shows that the Marshal on the battlefield is smarter than him, and that is intolerable. Manstein is summoned to Rastenburg, the headquarters of East Prussia. He arrives tired, his face marked by the cold and his eyes sunken. When he enters the room, Hitler greets him with that icy look of someone who mixes admiration and jealousy. "General Feldmarschall Manstein," Hitler said, "your victory was impressive, but why did you disobey my orders?" Manstein replies without hesitation, "Because, my Führer, if I had followed them, the 4th Panzer Army would no longer exist." The silence that follows is as heavy as lead. Hitler does not respond. He knows Manstein is right, but pride prevents him from admitting it. As he leaves the meeting, Manstein realizes what's coming. Germany won in Kharkov, but lost something deeper, clarity of command. From that point on, every victory would be eroded by political interference, Hitler's blind stubbornness, and the attrition of German forces. On the front lines, soldiers believe the tide has turned. They sing, they laugh. They believe that maybe, just maybe, they can win the war. But Manstein, in his cold silence, knows otherwise. Kharkov was a flash of genius at the beginning of the end. The Wehrmacht regained its honor, yes, but at the cost of the future. Because there is no horizon, Stalin is preparing something even bigger, Kursk. And this time, winter and destiny will not be on the German side. The wind blows over Kharkov like a lament. The streets, once vibrant, are now cemeteries of stone and ice. The sounds of battle have ceased, but the echo of destruction still vibrates among the ruins. The Germans won, but the city died with the victory. The houses are reduced to brick skeletons. The city center, burned by bombings and flamethrowers, reeks of gunpowder, burnt oil, and human flesh. Bodies are everywhere, frozen, mutilated, mixed in with enemies. The snow is no longer white. It is red, grayish, and as hard as iron. The remaining civilians walk in silence, like shadows among the rubble. Women carry buckets of dirty water. Children search for food among ruins and pieces of tanks. Some look at the SS. Soldiers with fear, others with silent hatred. No one believes in salvation anymore. Victory brought only another kind of hell. Inside the city, German military doctors set up makeshift field hospitals, cold, unheated sheds where the wounded groaned late into the night. Surgeons work with trembling hands, cutting through frozen flesh, amputating limbs without sufficient anesthesia. The floor is covered in dirty bandages and dried blood. Outside, the sound of the wind mixes with the muffled screams. A soldier from the Empire, she writes in her diary, "Victory is a ghost. We fought, we killed, we survived. But why? Kharkov is a tomb. The cold no longer freezes only bodies, it freezes the soul." The Soviets left behind hundreds of dead and wounded. Some are still breathing under the rubble. The Germans sometimes find them and silently fire a shot to end the suffering. War devours compassion, leaving only instinct. Meanwhile, Manstein inspects the front of the open car. He sees the wreckage, the burned-out tanks, the bodies of his men scattered among the debris. Not a word comes out of his mouth. He simply watches with the cold eyes of a man who has won, but understands the price of victory. From atop a ruined building, the flag with the black cross flutters in the wind. She symbolizes the redemption of the Wehrmacht, but beneath her, the blood of tens of thousands of men lies there. Kharkov is not just a reconquered city. It is an altar of sacrifice, where German military pride has been rebuilt, fueled by fire and corpses. On the horizon, the sky is still covered with dark clouds. The sun tries to break through, but the cold doesn't let up. And in the heart of every soldier, a truth begins to weigh heavily. Victory in that war, it no longer meant anything, because on the Eastern Front, whenever the blood dried, winter returned, and with it, the next massacre. The peak of victory was short-lived. Less than 2 weeks after the recapture of Kharkov, Manstein's advance began to lose momentum. We ran out of fuel, the infantry was exhausted, and the cold, that invisible and relentless enemy, returned to claim its tribute. The once unstoppable columns of German tanks now move slowly across the frozen plains of eastern Ukraine. The engines fail in the cold, the lubricants harden, and the men sleep huddled together inside the vehicles, trying to warm themselves with their own breath. Supplies are not arriving, roads are blocked, trucks are stuck, convoys are attacked by Soviet planes. The 4th Panzer Army de Hoth is squeezed between the rivers Donets and Oskol, battling against the terrain and against time. The skies, once dominated by the Luftwaffe, now belong to the Soviets again. Yak-1 and Il-2, they begin to appear in swarms, tearing through the grey skies and launching rockets at defenseless German columns. The Tiger tanks, a symbol of invincibility, burn like torches. The Wehrmacht is once again trapped in the infernal cycle of the Eastern Front. It advances, it wins, it bleeds, and it freezes. Manstein himself, in his frigid barracks, feels the weight of inevitable failure. He knows that the offensive, so brilliant and daring, has reached its limit. The reports arrive one after another. The troops are exhausted. There is no fuel. The artillery cannot advance. Meanwhile, the Soviets are reorganizing. The wrecked units in Kharkov are quickly replaced. New armies are forming, fresh, equipped, and with a burning purpose. Wings Kharkov. Marshal Zhukov and the General Rokossovsky, they are watching from Moscow and are already planning something colossal, a new offensive that will engulf everything that remains of Manstein's forces. Her name is still a secret, but in a few months the world will know her as Kursk. On the front lines, German soldiers sense that something is wrong. Victories don't bring more hope, they only prolong the suffering. The frozen bodies of comrades are used as makeshift barriers. Against the wind, those who are still breathing speak little. Some weep silently, gazing at the white, endless horizon. The wind blows across the Donets fields, carrying the smell of burnt oil and charred flesh. The same wind that accompanied the start of the offensive now blows like a death sentence. The tide is turning. Manstein knows this. He won, but he only won one battle, no war. And in the east, each German victory was merely the prelude to a greater defeat. As the sun sets over Kharkov, illuminating the ruined city with a reddish glow, the Marshal whispers to himself, "Winter always returns, and so does the enemy." Berlin is buzzing with euphoria. The Reich's newspapers featured triumphant headlines. Kharkov recaptured. The German army breaks through the Red Siege. Manstein, the genius of the East. The war is won. In the squares, the people applaud. Wounded soldiers are decorated, and the radio announces that the Eastern Front has been stabilized. But all of this is a comforting lie, a charade to hide the abyss opening up beneath Germany's feet. Kharkov, the victory of redemption, was a tactical triumph, but it was a strategic disaster. Manstein knew this. Hitler, no. The Führer, intoxicated by illusion, believes that the Wehrmacht has regained total control. In his headquarters in East Prussia, he displays colorful maps and tells the generals, "The Red Army is destroyed. The East is once again under German control." But the men around the table, Hoth, Zeitzler, Guderian, exchange silent glances. They know the truth. The Red Army is not destroyed, it is transforming. While the Germans celebrate Kharkov, Stalin reorganizes the entire front. New tanks T-34, 85 with thicker armor and more powerful cannons, they are rolling off the assembly line at a frenetic pace. Thousands of new recruits are being trained. The defensive lines are pulling deeper, and in the fields around Kursk, The ground is dug up day and night. Mines, trenches, barbed wire, anti-tank guns. The greatest battlefield in history is being prepared. But in Berlin, all you see is the glory of propaganda. The newsreels show Manstein and Hauser parading among the ruins of Kharkov, Tiger tanks advancing heroically, soldiers raising flags over destroyed buildings. The narrator's deep voice proclaims, "The honor of the Wehrmacht has been restored." The truth, however, lies in the trenches. There, the soldiers laugh bitterly at the radio transmissions. They know that the front has not been stabilized. They know that the enemy is still ahead, stronger and more numerous than ever. A veteran of Skull, he writes in a letter that never reaches Germany, "They say we won, but we only survived. Every victory here is made of mud, blood, and cold. And every city we take becomes a grave." Manstein, in turn, tries to alert the High Command. He writes memos, insisting that the army needs to retreat to defensive positions and prepare for the next Soviet offensive. But Hitler refused. "We will not retreat any further," shouts the Führer. "We will attack before them. We will crush them at Kursk." Kharkov's victory becomes the poison that feeds the German illusion. Hitler saw in her proof that he could win through willpower, not strategy. And so fate is sealed. Pride rose from the rubble, and like all illusions, it would soon be crushed by reality, a reality made of steel, fire, and millions of Soviet soldiers ready for revenge. The east wind blows cold across the Ukrainian fields. The snow begins to melt, revealing the ground soaked in blood and steel. Wreckage from the battle for Kharkov, forgotten bodies, charred tanks, nameless cities. But while the crows fly over the silence, a new storm is beginning to form. Manstein, still covered in glory, observes the maps on his desk. His tired eyes scan the red lines that snake across Soviet territory. There, in the center, he sees a protrusion, an immense outgoing no front, which extends deep into the territory occupied by the Germans. Your name, Kursk. For Manstein, that salient feature is an invitation and a trap. He knows that if the Germans attack from the north and south, they can surround hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers. But he also knows, from the experience of someone who saw Stalingrad fall, that the enemy, you will never be caught off guard again. Hitler, however, does not want to hear any doubts. Meeting with his generals in Rastenburg headquarters, he slams his fist on the table. The victory at Kharkov proved that the German army is still invincible. Now we will crush the Russians once and for all. Operation Citadel. Operation Citadel. It is conceived as a devastating blow, a colossal siege to eliminate the Kursk salient and regain the initiative in the east. But while the Germans are planning the attack, Stalin already knows everything. Radio interceptions, spy reports, and British assistance give the Soviets accurate information about the date, the axes of advance, and even the composition of the German divisions. And Stalin does not back down. He decides wait for the coup, absorb it, and then to counterattack with all the might of the Soviet Union. During May and June, the Soviets transformed Kursk into a colossal fortress. Thousands of civilians and soldiers work day and night. They are erected 1,000 kilometers of trenches, 400,000 anti-tank mines, 300,000 anti-personnel mines, hundreds of bunkers and machine gun positions. The ground vibrates with the sound of tractors and shovels. The hills are crisscrossed by barbed wire and moats, and in the surrounding forests, thousands of T-34 tanks and anti-tank guns lie hidden, waiting for the day. Meanwhile, the Germans are preparing for what they believe to be the decisive battle of the war. New tanks Panther and Tiger. They arrive in limited numbers, but each one is a beast of steel. The Luftwaffe concentrates its last fighter and bomber forces, and the armored divisions greater. Germany, Death's Head, Adolf Hitler's life guard, they gather their veterans, patching up tanks and cleaning weapons. But there's something dark in the air. Men sense this. In the fields, on the roads, on the trains carrying ammunition, there is an eerie silence. They know they are going to a battle like no other. A German captain writes in his diary, "The victory in Kharkov gave us hope, but what I feel now is fear. The Russians are no longer running away. They are waiting, and when they expect it, something terrible comes next." Manstein, cold and rational, observes everything with unease. He wanted to attack immediately, while the enemy was still reorganizing. But Hitler insists on postponing the offensive, waiting for more tanks, more supplies, more guarantees of victory. With each passing day, the enemy digs deeper, and each delay makes victory less likely. When the summer sun begins to dry the Ukrainian soil, fate is already sealed. The bloodshed in Kharkov was merely the prelude. Now the winds are blowing toward Kursk, and wings, steel and fire would decide the fate of the Eastern Front. The dawn of July 5, 1943, it is born with a thunderclap that does not come from the sky, but from the earth. More than 3,000 German tanks and 2,000 aircraft. They roar in unison, a symphony of steel and destruction. A Operation Citadel it started. Hitler believed it would be the final blow, but actually, it was the beginning of the end, or just tremble. Armored columns of the Wehrmacht are advancing across the fields south and north of the Kursk salient. Panzer IV, Tiger and Panther, they advance side by side, spitting fire. Behind them, mechanized infantry and artillery try to keep up the pace. The Luftwaffe plunges into low-level bombing raids, turning forests and villages to ashes. In the first few days, it seems that Kharkov's old brilliance has returned. The SS divisions Leibstandart, the Empire and Skull, they open deep breaches in Soviet defenses. German radio. Stations are blaring optimistic reports. The Russian lines are breaking. Victory is certain. But what the Germans don't know is that they are entering a carefully crafted nightmare. Every hill, every ravine, every wheat field was mined and camouflaged. The Soviet positions are arranged in depth, one after the other, untilted defensive lines. And when the German tanks break through the first barrier, the second one is already waiting. When the second one breaks through, the third one opens, and fire. It's like fighting against a living wall. The Soviet batteries fired incessantly. The T-34s appear out of nowhere, fast and furious, surrounding Tiger and Panther. The sky is filled with fighter jets, Yakandle GG-3 facing the Focke-Wulf and Messerschmitt in deadly duels. The air smells of gunpowder, iron and burnt flesh. The sound is an endless roar, as if hell had opened its gates in the heart of Russia. And then comes Prokhorovka. July 12, 1943, becomes the tank apocalypse. More than 200 armored vehicles. They collide within a few kilometers of each other. Dust and smoke make it impossible to distinguish enemy from ally. Tanks collide, cannons fire at point-blank range, men are crushed under steel tracks. It's the biggest armored vehicle duel in history. The Germans fight brutally, but the advance stalls. The Tiger tanks get stuck in the mud, ammunition runs out, the Luftwaffe loses air superiority, and then comes Stalin's order. Counterattack all the way forward. Suddenly, the Germans realize the trap closed. From all sides, Soviet divisions counterattacked with overwhelming force. The German flanks are crumbling. Radios are blaring cries for help. Men run through the fire trying to escape, but there's nowhere to run. Manstein observes the collapse with bitterness. He knows it's over. Kharkov was the last gasp of glory. Now, the Wehrmacht is bleeding to death. On July 13th, Hitler ordered the end of Operation Citadel. The dream of destroying the Red Army dies there. On the fields of Kursk, the Germans retreat, and what remains of their tanks is left behind, smouldering carcasses scattered for miles. The Eastern Front will never be the same again. From that summer onward, Germany would never attack in the East again. The war has turned. What began in Stalingrad ended in Kursk. The fall of the myth of German invincibility, and for the men who survived, both Germans and Soviets, the Kursk camp was neither a victory nor a defeat. It was only the end of an era, a steel graveyard where snow and blood mingled and where the roar of tanks became the distant echo of war itself. Kharkov was redemption. Kursk, that was the punishment.